Buonasera a tutti e bentornati in diretta con il MUA, Museo e Archivio Storico di Sydney. Oggi siamo qui con uno dei nostri talk, appuntamenti per parlare insieme ad esperti di arte, archeologia e architettura. Oggi parleremo in realtà in generale di beni culturali, quindi tutte e tre queste scienze rientrano benissimo nel dibattito che faremo oggi. Lo faremo con Sorin Hermon. Siamo veramente molto felici di ospitare qua uno dei professori associati del Cryprus Institute, istituto che ha vari dipartimenti di ricerca, tra cui lo STARC-C, Science and Technology in Archaeology e Cultural Research Center, in cui appunto lavora Sorin. Direttore anche dello Star Lab, di cui sicuramente poi ci parlerà lui stesso, una sorta di laboratorio mobile dotato di diverse tecnologie e strumentazioni, nonché docente del corso di dottorato di Scienze e Tecnologie applicate all'archeologia dello stesso Cryprus Institute. Chiaramente siamo molto contenti che, nonostante questo periodo ci tenga lontani dal museo fisicamente, ci dia la possibilità in realtà di avvicinarci a dei centri di ricerca come ad esempio questo che abbiamo oggi, perché appunto Sorin ci parlerà da Cipro, da Nicosia, dalla capitale. Ciao Sorin. Ok, allora direi subito di cominciare. Come vi dicevo, oggi parleremo appunto di tecnologie e quindi la prima domanda che vorrei porre a Sorin è: che cosa si intende per nuove tecnologie e quali sono queste nuove tecnologie? Perché ogni anno si parla di nuove tecnologie, ma quanto sono nuove o sono sempre le stesse? Cambiano di anno in anno? E poi in che modo si inserisce il tuo lavoro e in generale il lavoro del tuo gruppo e del tuo dipartimento e quali sono le vostre dotazioni? Vediamo un po'.
Grazie Isabella per l'invito. Allora Isabella si è scordata a dire che è stata da noi a Cipro per qualche tempo e ha contribuito molto alla crescita del nostro centro, ha portato le sue competenze in archeologia e non solo, e quindi siamo stati molto contenti di averla con noi.
Grazie.
Ora condivido il schermo e posso iniziare a parlare, e se è possibile vorrei parlare in inglese, anche perché penso che abbiamo della gente che non capisce l'italiano. Quindi se va bene proseguo in inglese.
Sì,
Okay?
allora faccio giusto un appunto, un'introduzione. Va benissimo in inglese, qualora qualcuno volesse delle informazioni, insomma qualcuno italiano che ci sta seguendo non dovesse capire qualcosa, ci può scrivere, e ne approfitto anche per dirvi che potete commentare o fare delle domande, chiedere insomma qualsiasi informazione voi vogliate, inerente ovviamente il discorso, commentando semplicemente direttamente nella diretta su Facebook o su YouTube, oppure se volete anche al numero WhatsApp che sta apparendo in questo momento in diretta. Ok, Sorin, your time.
Ok, grazie Isabella. So, we are living now, apart from the current situation, which hopefully will pass very soon, we are living some very important transformations, which the digital technologies enabled us. To sum up, these are called Internet of Things, meaning that everything is connected. We are living in a networked world. As you can see here, everything is connected to everything. Software, sensors, people help us in our daily life in numerous ways. All these Internet of Things and information actually relies on data. So data is something that is very important to our society today. And as such, we are passing now what it's called the fourth revolution, which is the digital transformation. And there are all kinds of data generated by research, generated by people, generated by social media, generated by automatically generated by sensors, and so forth. So the European Commission has decided that one of the priorities in order to develop furthermore the society is to open this data. What does it mean to open this data? So we're not talking about data of Star Trek, of course, but we are talking about one of the biggest sources of information that we have, biggest sources, some economic resources that we have. And I put here a comment by one of the European commissioners that realized the potential in opening this data and the importance of setting up large-scale reference structures that deal with that. So you can see here in this graph where we are standing nowadays in terms of data and data sharing. As expected, physics and life sciences, medicines have a long history of sharing data. And of course, this is for the benefit of all. We are here in a more traditional world within cultural heritage, archaeology, art, architecture, and we are still to grow a bit more and develop this culture of sharing. So you see here that we are somewhere in the long tail of data sharing in the humanities, but nevertheless, we are moving forward. And one of the ways to move forward is to understand that our data, what we are producing, has to follow some principles, again, set up by the European Commission, which are gathered together under the term fair data. Fair standing for findable, so our data needs to be found somehow. Data needs to be accessible, so people can have really access to that data. Data needs to be interoperable, meaning that various sensors that produce data in various formats, in various shapes, can talk to each other and can interact with each other. And then, of course, data has to be reusable, meaning that if I'm producing something in research, for example, a company that wants to use my 3D model of an archaeological site would be able to do that for cultural tourism, for example. Moving on, and you see here some... So what can work? Again, this is part of our digital transformation. We cannot rely anymore on the concept that, trust me, I'm a good researcher, I'm an amazing researcher, take my results and don't care about the data itself. So these things cannot work, and we need really a paradigm shift where we have access to the data that is produced. So having in mind these aspirations and these goals, I brought here a few examples of the European Commission that recently funded and it's continuing to fund. And one of the biggest things that happens now in the world of heritage and heritage sciences and related studies is the setting up of a European infrastructure. What does it mean, a European infrastructure for heritage science? Many labs, most of the labs in Europe decided to work together, to collaborate, to share data, to share expertise, to provide networking activities, to provide training, and help promote heritage in Europe, because as the European Commission also said, put up, heritage is one of the major economic assets and major sources of economic growth. So IRIS is organized around 4 platforms. One is called Arch Lab, which gathers together all the archives, all the laboratories, deposits of samples, of reports, of images, of anything that has been gathered in the past 200 years and more in some cases regarding sciences applied to conservation, restoration, and study of heritage. Then we have MoLab. These are a set of laboratories, and I will give you an example later on, where instead of bringing the object to the lab comes to the objects, and you see here a few examples of tools that are set up in various environments, in a church, in a square, in an archaeological site, in a monastery, and so forth. And the main idea is to develop tools and methods that are non-invasive, don't take samples, don't touch the object, don't damage the objects whatsoever, in order to perform a wide range of analysis. Then we have fixed lab, which deal with very large-scale facilities, and you see here some examples of them, where work is done in a very, very precise way. For example, using accelerators. And then we have DigiLab, which is the main digital platform of IRIS to provide tools and digital tools and a space where data can be gathered and analyzed together. Another major initiative in Europe regarding our domain is Ariadne Plus. And it's a project that aims to set up a data infrastructure serving the archaeological community worldwide. And I brought here the snapshot from the website. So you can see that it deals with many, many aspects. It provides training. It provides policies, advice, access to facilities, and above all, a platform where archaeological data is shared among many, many institutions. And the latest initiative that I wanted to talk about is 4CH, which aims to set up a competence center on the conservation of cultural heritage. This is a new initiative that started only this month. And the idea is that all this knowledge that now it's spread around Europe in various centers, institutions, organizations, and so forth, comes together in order to create this competence center that would help heritage institutions, archaeological sites, museums in their digital transformation path. So, coming to our institute, I wanted to talk a bit about that because also it's it has a, in my opinion, and not only mine, we have a very interesting structure. We are a research and innovation institute with our own PhD and Master of Science program. It is built around key research topics, and luckily cultural heritage was identified as one of the key research topics, along with computational sciences, energy, environment, and water. We have a very updated and very good infrastructure, and I think Isabella can also testify for that. And the centers and the infrastructures work together. The emphasis is on cross collaboration among scientists, among people. We are now something like 200 researchers, and you can see here from 26 different nationalities. So it's a very interesting environment to work because of this multiculturalism, but above all, because we are able to collaborate very easily and very fruitfully across many, many disciplines. So within this framework, our program, and I put also some, this is also an opportunity to advertise our program, both in PhD, and you see here the courses, but also in the newly opened Master of Science program that started last year, which I believe it's a very innovative one, and it has both the PhD and also the Master of Science. They have a very applied concept. So we provide a very solid and broad background, theoretical background in art, humanities, and technologies. And then we are, through the courses that you see here, we provide expertise and above all, applied knowledge to prepare future researchers, but also future professionals in the cultural heritage conservation, administration, or valorization. So one of the laboratories that we set up a while ago, and I think Isabella was also part of this process somehow, because we were just setting it up when she was with us, is a mobile infrastructure for archaeological and heritage science research. And basically, it's a truck. You can see it here. It has a custom-made cabin on the chassis, which is actually a lab with air condition, with foldable tables, and with a very broad range of instrumentation that help archaeologists, conservators, architects, whoever works in this domain, in situ, at the site itself. So we bring the truck to an archaeological site and we work there. In this case here, you see the truck parked in the museum, and we bring the objects inside the truck and we analyze them through XRF, 3D scanning, georadar, drones, spectroscopy, all kinds of measurements. So, should I continue, Isabella, or...
Ok, grazie, bellissimo. Sì, continuo a dire che ripeto, se qualcuno dovesse avere necessità di una qualsiasi delucidazione o volesse fare delle domande, può scriverci. Bellissimo, chiaramente, la parte del track, appunto, diciamo dell'istituto mobile, ecco. Sarebbe stato bellissimo averlo quando abbiamo fatto a Paulilatino il lavoro sul pozzo di Santa Cristina, sarebbe stato fantastico. Ok, sì, no, adesso passo subito alla seconda domanda, la faccio sia in inglese che in italiano, insomma, così quantomeno introduciamo l'argomento. Adesso parliamo delle applicazioni che possono avere queste nuove tecnologie di cui tu ci hai parlato finora nei beni culturali. So what kinds of application, how can we apply these technologies that you shared with us on cultural heritage in general?
Ok, grazie Isabella. Allora andiamo avanti proprio con il caso che avevi accennato, Paolo Latino, anche perché insomma pensavo che può stare bene. So, the first example comes from Sardinia. If those who listen have not yet visited Sardinia, I would highly recommend it as one of the first targets of their vacations. It's a beautiful island with a beautiful archaeology and beautiful people. So the case here is one of the highlights of the archaeological record of the island. And it's a unique phenomena in the Mediterranean basin. And it regards these structures which are called, they have various names and actually various uses also in modern times, but they generally refer to as sacred wells. So you go down on these stairs and there is water down here. You can see here the stairs. These structures are around 3,000 years old, and Santa Cristina is one of the more famous ones. You see here a picture of the person who excavated the site way back in the 60s. These are two pictures of how the site looked like when a priest visited the place in the 19th century, and how the place looks now after the excavation and after the restorations of Enrico Azzeni. So one of our tasks that we work together with Isabella, and Isabella is actually the main researcher here, was to understand how this site was built, how it functioned maybe, and also to try to understand where the actually remains finish and the new restoration that was done by Enrico Azzeni start. So for that, we brought part of our equipment, and you see here our scanner in the water scanning, and also outside. It was not a simple logistics done. Keep in mind also that this work was done now 10 years ago. I think. So once we had the 3D model, we could do a lot of different measurements. In this case, here is an example of various works on symmetry at the site. We could visualize the underground structure. You see here this Tolos with the famous stairs. The water is down here. And because we had a very highly accurate 3D model, we could measure everything. These measurements helped us understand how this building was erected, and we proposed here a step-by-step reconstruction of this construction. So on a slope, there was a digging, construction of the lintel, then the Tolos, it's the basis of the Tolos, then bringing it up and filling on the sides with the earth. So this is the major, this lintel here is the major thing that actually holds everything together. Then we said, okay, let's try to see how the building may have looked like when it was completed. And looking at the soil, looking at the type of stones, we have conducted a set of statics analysis with the help of an engineer and an architect. And we came up with various solutions, and we see here an example of the height of a building that could have been erected above ground, which actually is a kind of mirror of the Tolos underground. And here are examples from other sites in Sardinia that are also belong to the same group of sacred wells. So we concluded that this is how the building could have looked like. The stairs were quite narrow, and the whole ceremony, if there was a kind of ceremony, was kind of personal, let's say. 2 or 3 people going around, and then in the outside building, there was place for something like 10 people. And because we had all the 3D measurements, we were able also to estimate the effort that was needed in order to construct that, keeping in mind the sources of the stones, the quarries, cutting them, and so forth. And we reached a hypothesis that these kind of structures could have been built relatively easy by the local communities. Moving on, this is an example from Cyprus, and here I wanted to show how a 3D model of a building can be of help in many, many different ways. So this is the main cathedral of Cyprus, of Nicosia. It's also the seat of the archbishop. It was built during the time that the island was occupied by the Ottoman Empire, which also restricted the way the building can look from outside. So it's kind of quite modest when you look at it. So the work that I will show you now is a result of a collaboration with the University of Catania, and the results are part of a master thesis of one of the students there. So we 3D scanned the building, and you see here from where we scan it. We did 3D, we did also photogrammetry. And once we had this 3D model, we were able to separate every single architectonic unit and also assign it to different periods. So we see immediately the history of construction of the building and the way it has been constructed. Moreover, going forward, we were able to analyze every single detail to see how the arches were built, what was the method for building every arch, how every architectonic feature connects to each other, and also looking at the facade and the interior and mapping cracks. We were able also to say a lot about the conservation state of this building. The work was taken on forward, and now we will show you a collaboration with the Polytechnic of Milano, where a student completed his master thesis on the same building using the same 3D model, but for a totally different purpose, namely to understand what can happen to the building in case of an earthquake. And you see here a map of various earthquakes, and Nicosia, which is here, is quite in a risk zone. There were some very strong earthquake in the past, in historic times. So basically, you see here, we have to be very well aware of this risk and prepare our heritage structures in case of such a event happens. So here are some examples of modeling of what may happen, which kind of geometric deformations will happen to the building given various scenarios of magnitudes of the earthquake. Moving on, the same 3D model, we now look at it from a totally different perspective, and as you will see soon, the building inside is very, very decorated. So what's the meaning of this decoration? Why they appear in this way? Many of them have historic scenes. Many of them represent historic figures, as you see here. So why they are there? Why they were put in a specific place? Who could see them and who could understand what they see if they don't know the history of the place? Keep in mind also that the building was erected during the Ottoman period, and for sure these decorations had a lot of historical messages, social messages that go much, much beyond the religious aspect. So in order to understand that, we have done, and this is again a work of a PhD student in our group. She took the 3D model, put it into a GIS environment, and looked at something called visual acuity, meaning being in various positions, what you can see, which kind of level of detail you can see. So the conclusion was that the first half of the nave, so basically where you enter, was the most important one. Then there is a deliberate composition west-east, facing Jerusalem, and the historical scenes are put in the most visible areas. And unfortunately for them, at that time, the least important scenes were in the women's gallery. So moving on to a totally different period, to a different place, we are now in a very nice area near the shores, near Larnaca, near modern town of Larnaca, and you see here the shoreline. We are working, our group works with excavation teams from Belgium, from the Université Catholique de Louvain, and from the University of Ghent, as well as with the Center of Mediterranean Archaeological Society from Crete. At this site, Pila Kokinokremos, which is a late Bronze Age site, short-lived, but with an amazing archaeological record. I brought, you see up here, some of the vessels that were found. The characteristic of this site is that it was very short-lived, maybe 50, 60 years, but it has a casemate wall all around. But the record itself is comes from Crete, from Mycenaean pottery, from Anatolia, from Mesopotamia, from the southern Levant, and also from Sardinia. So we can really see the cultural melting pot that was happening at this late Bronze Age period, represented here at the site. So we have conducted 3D documentation of the site using drones, and I would like to emphasize here the importance of setting up very carefully these missions. Many people have the idea that, okay, we have a drone, we put the camera, we fly over, we take photos, and then we can do a 3D model. Actually, it's a very complex process, and we have in our drone team professional pilots, because we have to set up very carefully the path, the altitude, the speed, in order to obtain very accurate ground resolutions that enable us to capture all the architectonic details that exist. So, moving from the site level to objects, this is an example from, again, a PhD work. At Pila, there are also some tablets that were found, but also in other sites in Cyprus, some in Ugarit in the northern Levant, and also in Greece. There is a corpus of around 200 objects bearing inscriptions in an alphabet which is called Cyprominoan. It has not been translated yet. We don't know how many signs there are. There are still discussions about signs and their interpretation. And through the application of 3D techniques, we want, through the PhD of our student, to understand, first of all, how many signs there are, to gather the corpus and prepare the grounds for its translation. So here is just an example of a famous seal, which has inscriptions all over. You can see here. We 3D scanned it, unwrapped the model, and you can see here enlarged these signs. Having a very accurate scanning of sub-millimeter resolution, we are able to talk about how the signs were inscribed, what is their initial shape, identify possible scribes, and so forth. Another example comes from the analysis of alabaster vessel and its content, as it was a very interesting discovery. You see here, during the excavation, a pitos was identified. Here is the rim and then the body. And then the archaeologists found that actually this big pitos was put there just to hide another vessel. So this was hidden, and inside the vessel there were a group of objects, from ivory, from there is a seal, a knife, and rings, and so forth. So the vessel itself was also very interesting because it had some visible decorations, which are black. But when we looked with the ultraviolet light on it, and we applied also a technique called visible induced luminescence, we were able to identify traces of Egyptian blue, which, for those who don't know, Egyptian blue is one of the first synthetic color component material that has ever been invented, in order to replicate, to make a cheaper, let's say, to make a cheaper color than the very expensive lapis lazuli. And here you have some snapshots from the microscope showing these very minute traces that we found, and an XRF analysis showing the chemical composition of Egyptian blue. So we took one of these objects and we 3D scanned it, and here it is. It's a unique object. It has this head, which was mounted on a blade, never seen before. Analyzing it through the 3D, we saw that it has a kind of different composition. Looking with the XRF, with the X-ray fluorescence, we saw major differences between the two parts. And here is the composition of each part. Basically, the head itself had higher compositions of arsenic, which may mean that it has a different source of copper. It has also higher composition of piombo, of lead, which may be the result of a composition to help modeling better the head. Having the 3D, we could look into canons. Were they following some canons of beauty or canons of aesthetics? And immediately we see that the ears are in the wrong place. The nose related to the mouth is quite different. The angle of the nose related to the face itself, again, is not normal. So it does not follow really the normal canons of a human face. We could also identify traces of hair braids that actually are somehow missing in some places. So overall, having all these in mind, we were able then to look into some analogies. And these are figurines made from pottery, as you can see. And actually, they resemble a lot in many, many aspects. Our bronze figurine follows the same canons of these pottery figurines, including here you see these decorations or whatever was on their neck. And again, the entire posture of the head follows these figurines. Here is an example of another figurine that was found at the site in early excavations, but in a totally different use, probably, because our figurine has a blade and this one no. So we are very curious to see what could have been done with this blade. So we took a virtual hand and we start moving the object virtually around. We also looked at the abrasion on the blade itself, and we saw that probably the object was handled like that, maybe as a spatula, maybe for some to combine some powder, or maybe to cut something very thinly. Ok. Isabella?
Ok, sì, bellissimo. Soprattutto molto interessante questo oggetto che insomma è veramente unico, bellissimo, la lama appunto poi sulla quale si inserisce questa sorta di figurina in bronzo, veramente un unico. Vorrei riallacciarmi a due cose che hai detto, perché ci è arrivata una domanda relativamente al 3D modeling, perché qualcuno è rimasto in qualche modo stupito dal fatto che si siano trovati tutti quei dati con il solo rilievo 3D e chiedevano che tipo di oggetto, che tipo di strumento sia stato utilizzato appunto per il 3D, perché chiaramente poi non tutti sanno in che modo, chiaramente tutti conoscono il 3D nel senso come prodotto ultimo, però non tutti poi sanno quale sia l'iter da seguire per poi raggiungere quel risultato.
Okay, allora, so we are using for objects a structural light scanner, and you see it here in action. The main idea is that the resolution of the scanning has to follow the aim of the work itself. So what does it mean? In our case, we wanted to capture all the geometric irregularities, all the geometric features that exist in the real object. So for that, we use this method, which allows a margin of error, basically, of a few microns, basically. So this is what we used here. In the field, here, we have used methods. One is photogrammetry on a drone. So we put up a camera on the drone, and we were flying back and forth on parallel paths with an overlap of 80% in order to be able to capture as much information as possible. Much information as possible, meaning that the ground resolution, I mean, how much information you can put in a smaller square, was of 2 or 3 centimeters. So it's quite high again. We used also a field scanner for capturing the architectonic elements, which I didn't show here. So I hope I answered the question.
Ok, perfect. Sì, you did. Ok, partendo da questo che abbiamo detto e soprattutto la tua puntualizzazione sull'uso dei droni, perché ormai tutti dicono facilissimo, tutti hanno un drone, insomma si può comprare su Amazon per esempio, e chiaramente le persone dicono facile utilizzarlo, no? Prendo il telefono, utilizzo una app e posso fare qualsiasi cosa. In realtà poi creare dei risultati effettivamente funzionanti e vincenti che chiaramente raggiungono l'obiettivo preposto non è così immediato. Quindi è molto importante, soprattutto in questo periodo storico che stiamo vivendo e che ci tiene lontani dai luoghi di cultura, intesi in senso molto ampio, capire quale ruolo stiano rivestendo o abbiano già rivestito queste nuove tecnologie, in termini sia di fruizione, quindi di avvicinamento delle persone sia ai musei ma anche agli oggetti che vi sono esposti, e alla valorizzazione dei beni culturali. So considering all the historical time that we are living now, that is at the moment leaving us away from cultural heritage in general, a museum and object inside of the museum especially, what role are having these new technologies that you were talking about in terms of valorization and access of this cultural heritage?
Okay, thank you, Isabella. So I really like this image here. Actually, it's a very old one, and you can immediately identify that it's an old one. For those who don't understand the French, the father explained to his child, look, son, this is Mosè, and these are the tables, the tablets. So the son asked, why does he take a photo of the skies with his tablet? Nowadays we have a smartphone, so we don't need the tablets anymore, but the concept is the same. We need explanations to, so we need to use the right terminologies, we need to use the right explanations, we need to use the right technologies as well. And I wanted to show here how various digital technologies, in this case, can help cultural heritage in their digital transformation path and innovation areas. I brought, you will see also later on, 4 areas that were identified by a group of experts with whom I worked recently, and this is the result of this common effort. So the first innovation area that we considered as important is creating transformative hybrid experiences. What does it mean? So immersive technologies such as 3D, augmented reality, and so forth offer multi-sensory encounters with cultural heritage that brings together elements from the physical and digital world. So really talking about hybridization here. And such hybrid experiences use digital assets to transform mundane physical surrounding into spaces for creativity, active learning, and collective engagement. Moreover, nonlinear and personalized narration techniques enable educational and creative opportunities that can be adapted to all levels of skills and knowledge. So, in a way, immersive technologies open up engagement possibilities for people of all ages, culture, and abilities. So this is an example, again, a PhD work from our group. And he graduated a few years ago, and he was looking at the problem that when you go to a museum, objects are under a glass, you cannot touch them, you can look at them only from through this glass, which very often is reflective because of the light, because of the conditions, because of many things. So you're missing a lot of information from them. Moreover, many objects are in storerooms, so they cannot be exhibited, and again, we're missing something. So he wanted to set up a system that would allow a better interaction, a natural interaction, through augmented reality, and actually using only a very simple smartphone, and at that time there was these Google Glasses. So first prerequisite, of course, is to have high quality 3D models, and we were also lucky enough to participate in various virtual museum projects with museum in Cyprus, and here is just a few of a very large collection of 3D models that we have acquired. So the system itself is here. You have the shelf, and using only your hands, you can take the model, you can take the object, and then you can rotate. You get information about it. You can look at it from various perspectives. In this case, it's a musician. You also hear you may hear the sound that was played by that instrument, and so forth. So it was the project was very successful, particularly for kids, unsurprisingly. The other action the other innovation area that we found important regarded how we can activate citizen engagement through cultural heritage, and particularly relevant in this period, how we can do that online. So museums need sustainable approaches to engaging with audiences online, and they need to do it through social media. There are a lot of tools and a lot of ways, but museums need to look into the most optimal, also for them, strategies that link between their collections and the community and the society and the citizens. Also to highlight the social role of these collections. So here is an example, a work that we have done again some years ago with the Israel Museum, which is an encyclopedic museum. It's one of the 10 biggest museums in the world. And in this case, we had an interesting story of a famous sculptor, Jacques Lifshitz, who at a certain point died, and the family donated the entire workshop of this sculpture, not only the works of art that he has done, but the entire environment of the sculpture, because for those who will go one day to the museum, will see Jacques Lifshitz was an avid collector. He had his own cabinet of curiosities. He collected statues from all over the world, which were also a source of inspiration from him. So before his death, he was interviewed for a very long time. We had 6 hours of interview. And what we decided to do is to set up a kind of environment for visitors. And you see here a visitor at the museum sitting in front of a screen and asking questions. She's asking questions to the artist. And the system brings up scenes from this interview where the artist talks about the subject posed by the visitor. So in this way, there is a direct link both with the artist, with the object, with the sculptures, with the works of art of the artist, but also with his creative environment. Then the third innovation area that we found as very relevant in these days is how to build communities around cultural heritage, and how museums can become a catalyst for social cohesion and develop new activities driven by co-creation, co-production, together with the local communities. So in this way, we thought it's very important that citizens intervene in museum practices. They advance the concept of participatory heritage and set up inclusive narratives that stimulate intercultural dialogue. So in anywhere, museums should be in very close relations with the communities. They should not be disconnected, because at the end of the day, museums serve these communities. They are for the people, and a real dialogue should be established. And this dialogue should come out with participatory storytelling, for example, co-curation, collaborative curations, digital campaign, crowdsourcing of digital objects, and so forth. So I brought here an example which I was very happy to participate. It was a great experience for our entire team. And here we worked with a primary school in a town, in a village actually, near Nicosia. The village is called Pitga, and actually it has a very long history. It was a Turkish Cypriot, Greek Cypriot mixed village, and it has heritage all over. This is a chapel, and it's called the Royal Chapel because one of the Latin queens of Cyprus married here. So there are water mills, Venetian bridges. So it has a very rich history. And you can see some of these remains are not really well kept. People tend to forget. The Turkish Cypriot community left the village a long time ago, and they spread around. And actually, through this work, we were also able to bring back virtually and meet virtually between the Turkish Cypriot and the Greek Cypriots, also at like personal levels encounters. So what we did, we went to the village and we spoke with the kids. We told them about digital and about heritage, and we said, okay, let's try to set up a kind of game, a kind of activity. What do you think about heritage? What is important? Look for the treasure. And you see here the kids running, and the headmaster is in front. They are going around and they are looking for heritage to document. So they used 3D. So you can see here kids using 3D, kids using records. They went to the library, they went to their archives, and they brought back old lists. We also asked for them to bring from home old objects or objects that they think are important to be preserved because they mean something to them. And we also asked them to describe them, to document them. And you see here kids in the church here talking, and it was also a great experience with them because they were working together. They kind of set up their working groups without us telling them. So everything was open. We let them do whatever they thought it's important. So they came up with very interesting descriptions. So those who know the terms metadata, this is kind of on-demand co-creation of metadata. And the kids made beautiful 3D model of the church, of the objects. And we took here also some examples of the result of their work. So they think in terms of, when we asked them why cultural heritage is important, they said, well, in the case of the church, the drawings on the wall are the most important one. And the monument is important because it's old, and that's why it's important to preserve it. Many of them wanted to give back the monument the original appearance because they kind of puzzled why, for example, the tower was not reconstructed and so forth. And also they suggested ways to make it more appealing to the visitors, for example, by planting trees and flowers. So finally, the last innovation area that we consider important regards how actually we can link between research, administration, and creative industries by exploring cross-sectorial collaborations and innovative business models. So here we're talking about a relationship between the private and the public sector, and we actually need new business models that are sustainable and are beneficial for all. So I will not read all of it, but this is the essence. Everybody's asking us now for costing. Everything is costed. Everything needs to be evaluated somehow. Museums hold a huge asset. Their collections are very important. So we need to see how these assets can be put within the value chain, within new business models. And I brought here an example of such a collaboration that we are doing in Cyprus with municipality, with the private industry, and of course with our own research itself. So we have worked in collaboration with the Nicosia municipality and also with the team from the National Council of Research in Italy in documenting the walls of Nicosia. So the walls of Nicosia, you see here a snapshot from a historic map, were built by the Venetians in help of protecting the city from the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, we all know the result. Nevertheless, they are very important. They are very impressive, and also it's quite difficult to document them. We use 3D scanning and photogrammetry to go around. Actually, I don't know if you can see here from this aerial image, but as you know, Nicosia is a divided capital. The green line passes more or less in the center of the city. So when we go around to try to document these bastions and the walls, it's not easy. Okay, you can understand the complexity of the task. Nevertheless, we managed to do that. And here is an example of how we documented one of the access gates to the town. This is called Paphos Gate. And using the 3D model that we had and documenting also the excavations around, we planned a kind of path which would be the optimal in order to see around all the remains, considering also the access route, how many people can walk around, and what they can see while they walk around this area. Then we created also an environment, a virtual environment, to explore in more details various components of this gate. And you see here a short video demonstrating how this works. So you go around and you can pick up objects, you look around, and if you find something of interest, you can pick it up and look at it and have more information about it. The video is quite long. I can move it. I can do fast forward. So this is the idea here.
Bellissimo.
Then we took the same 3D model and we extended it, and you see here the entire city in 3D. And this is used not only for our research purposes, but also you see here for the citizens. You saw an example. This is kind of a kiosk where people can visualize routes of the transportation, from where the bus or a tram that is planned to have, and the bus is from where the bus is moving. So this is really a platform for the municipality itself, and it has you see here clicking on the transportation, you see paths from where buses are going, so it's quite easy to choose your right bus. Places of interest, and when you look at them, you can see in details what are these places of interest. And this is a snapshot, for example, of the Leventis Gallery of Art. And then you have neighborhoods, you have other places of interest in terms of not only culture, but also economy, and so forth.
Perfetto, yes. Grazie, bellissimi contributi, veramente, veramente bellissimi. Poi quest'ultimo mi ha riportato chiaramente molto vicino a Nicosia e mi ha ricordato la difficoltà effettivamente di poter girare attorno alle mura, che sono splendide, ci sono alcuni punti però che sono effettivamente impossibili da raggiungere perché fanno parte della green zone e quindi non sono accessibili ai civili, così si può dire, e altre zone invece in cui chiaramente è un po' più complesso arrivarci perché magari ci sono delle altre costruzioni. E effettivamente la possibilità di poterci girare attorno attraverso appunto una piattaforma come questa è veramente sensazionale, bellissimo, veramente, veramente bello. Quindi grazie. Ok, passiamo all'ultima domanda, che diciamo si allontana un po' dall'archeologia. Questo perché? Perché tendenzialmente quando si parla di nuove tecnologie, immediatamente si pensa subito all'archeologia, all'architettura e in campo artistico ci si sofferma prettamente alle opere d'arte che possono essere ad esempio le sculture, quindi oggetti cosiddetti a tutto tondo. Che apporto invece possono dare queste nuove tecnologie a opere d'arte, ad esempio bidimensionali come pitture oppure xilografie o disegni o ancora a documenti storici che comunque sono e rientrano a pieno titolo nei beni culturali. So normally when we talk about new technology, we immediately think of archaeology and architecture. When we talk about art field, we normally focus on sculptures, but what kind of contribution can this kind of new technologies bring to two-dimensional artworks, such as paintings, xylography, and drawings? And is there a way to use them for example, historical documents?
Okay, grazie Isabella. So I brought two examples, a very short one, but a very significant one, and another one which will be much more details, because I wanted also to show how we can go very much in depth in the analysis of a painting using new technologies. So the first example is this painting that arrived to us for analysis. It's a very small one. And it was attributed to the school of El Greco. So it arrived to us as not of the artist itself, not of Domenikos Theotokopoulos, but of his school. So you see here the painting, San Francis with the stigmata. And we applied a set of methods. So for example, one of the first one that we looked at using infrared reflectography. It's a method that is using a camera that is much more sensitive to light. And immediately we could see a crack, a very long crack that was very nicely covered by restoration. But we could also see here, and this is very important, the way the artist was sketching first the represented figure. So we have, in this way, we have the surface and the subsurface, not visible with the naked eye, now visible thanks to this method. So we can understand really the technique of sketching of the artist. But this is kind of questa è una cosa banale, it's something very important. But the important thing was later on, where we continue to apply the other filters. We looked also with the digital microscope, with the spectroscopy, with many, many other things. And we discovered here, you can see also some letters. I hope you can all see them. And having us discovered these letters made the owner of this painting a very, very happy person. Because actually, these letters are the original signature of El Greco himself, signing here in Greece, here Domenicos. So D, you see here, the hand of Domenicos. So using this set of imaging techniques, primarily imaging techniques, we are able to identify a very important historical aspect of this painting. I wanted to show another example, much more in depth. In this regards, an Italian painter, Giovanni Baronzio. He was a very important painter. He belonged to the group of artists from Rimini, who is thought that they were all inspired by Giotto in their composition, in their way of framing the subjects, and also these 3D dimensional compositions, which were at that time a very innovative thing. So there is very little is known about Baronzio. There are very few paintings that remain that can be attributed to him. And one of them is this painting here, which was part of probably a bigger painting, Christ on the cross. The painting itself had various owners. It was initially in the monastery that I have shown, but this monastery underwent very heavy bombing in the Second World War. You see it here, the Santa Maria in Porto Fuori was totally destroyed, and its frescoes were stolen and never recovered. So this painting came out in Paris at the Han collection. Then it was sold to the Sestieri collection in Italy, and now it's in a private collection in Cyprus. So this is the painting itself. It's very remarkable, tempera and gold on a panel. It's quite small, as you can see here. And it was part of a diptych, so around. Now, looking at historical records about this painting, we could find several images of the painting and several transformations of the images. So in 1948, the painting looked like that. Then in 2004, it had a totally different composition. And nowadays, again, it is modified a bit closer to the 1948 version. Looking further in archives, we found images that show a bit more in detail the history of interventions of these paintings. And you see here some of these images from the early one to the later version that we hold in our hands in our lab. So there are many, many questions that we wanted to ask. For example, how the gilded background was done and where it extends. These cracks are because of what? What is on this damaged area on the lower right corner? Then looking on the details, you see here, for example, that many details change through time. This pelican that appear on the top of the cross changed shape, and the INRI letters suddenly appear in later versions. the angel that brings water, also it was heavily restored, and also its composition change. One of the soldiers suddenly has a helmet which he didn't have before, and so forth. Moving on, also in early versions we have a spear, but then in later version the spear turns into a sponge, so to clean the wounds. The same with the flag, and the same with many other details, the background that is covering. So really there were many aspects that were changed. The most notable one is at the bottom of the painting in the lower half, where you see in initial paintings the figure is much more, the central figure is much more slender. They hold the figure on the right with this knife here, holds this shroud in a very different way than in the last version, and it's also totally different from the version of 2004. And you see here more in detail these changes that occurred. So what can we say about these paintings in terms of its history of conservation and restorations, and the history of interventions that happened? And what can we say about the artist techniques that he applied? So we used various analytical methods and digital methods, imaging methods, all non-destructive and non-invasive, meaning that with our instruments we didn't touch the painting and we didn't extract samples. So first of all, we did an X-ray analysis, and we saw many details that do not appear on the latest painting here, which they are covered, and it also shows a very intensive use of LED-based colors. So all these white spots are because of the LED that is reflecting the X-rays. Then we used multispectral imaging. This is a technique that reacts with the material of the paintings, of the colors themselves, and tell us about which materials have been used. So you see here, for example, immediately we can identify where dark areas, all these dark areas that we see here, represent absorption of light by fresh organic matter. So these are modern restorations. And white fluorescence areas represent aged organic matter. So they're old restorations. So for example, like here, here, and here. So immediately we have a map of restorations, old and new. Then looking at so you see here the painting itself, looking with a digital microscope, we could see some very interesting details. For example, changes in the granulation of the colors between one episode of restoration and the other along the face of this figure here, and also paintbrush over the cracks. Then we saw something even more interesting on the latest version. Looking at the shroud itself, you see all these cracks, the craquelure. But actually, when we look with the microscope, we saw that these are fake cracks. They were painted. So these, the person who restored the object wanted to give the impression of old, so he faked cracks. Then we took a lot of point analysis with the XRF in order to identify the pigments that were used. And you see here some of the most commonly used chemical composition of colors, of chromium green, lithopon, and cadmium for red. Then we applied another technique, which is large format images. These are images, but in a very, very large format. And you can see here a lot of very minute details. The same goes with another method, which is called RTI, where you take a range of images on the same spot, but changing the light conditions. So at the end, you have an image, which is an overlap of many, many, many other images. And by changing the light, you can see many details about how the color was applied, conservation matters, and so forth. So you see here, for example, how the incised lines follow guiding sketches that were done. So by our analysis, we could reconstruct the layers of these paintings. So we have pictorial layers, a brown background, a white preparation layer made of gypsum and calcite, and then the wooden panel. Whereas on the front side, there are white preparation layers and pictorial layers, and then a varnish. Then we could reconstruct the pigments themselves, the colors that were used. And you see here the most important ones: red, green, white, brown, and black. And immediately we could see which kind of colors were used in which period. Also because we know through historical research that some colors were invented very late. For example, white, which is based on titanium. So we could have the entire repertoire of the entire record of colors in a very precise way. The white, the gold, the flesh tones, how they were used, and so forth. So for every detail, we had a full characterization of the colors used. Of course, this helps a lot in comparative studies, in conservation studies, in restoration studies. So then we looked on specific techniques. For example, gilding. Gilding is how gold was applied, and we could see various methods for applying the gold here and here, and also other techniques. For example, a technique called estofado, where you kind of scratch in order to have this metal shine at the edges of cracks, which are below the paint color. And you have gold and silver that comes out, and they are very shiny, of course. And then also we could see here a preparation layer. So this reddish color here is the preparation on which the gold leaves are applied. Finally, we wanted to reconstruct the history of interventions. And here you see some examples of these overpaints and how somebody tried very carefully to paint over all the cracks, while in other cases painted some cracks. And finally, all these spots here show modern intervention. Zinc, barium, and titanium are all modern paintings, modern colors that were used in the last century onwards. So you see it was quite heavily restored. So I can make a short break here, or I can sum up. Isabella?
Sì, certo, sì, assolutamente.
Okay, this is just to sum up a bit what we were talking about in terms of digital technology and cultural heritage. In terms of the research itself, it's very important to collaborate between the academia, public administration, citizens, and the private sector in order to create this ecosystem of collaboration. Of course, data is a central point of this collaboration. So we need to come up with very clear protocols, for example, how to acquire 3D data, as we have seen before, which policies are needed, for example, when we are digitizing objects, what we should look at which resolution the 3D model has to be, and so forth. And it's very important to think about how we integrate all this data. We are living in the Internet of Things world, so everything has to be connected. Then in terms of conservation, again, there are, we are living in a, we are feeling climate change, and there are many agents that have a negative impact on our heritage. And we need to be aware of it. We need to see, and we need to model, to predict how and what will happen to our heritage if we do nothing now. And we need to do quite a lot, actually. The European Commission has this big, very ambitious Green Deal initiative, and cultural heritage should be an integrated part of it. Then in terms of valorization, we are talking about trust, preservation, meaningful engagements, bring the citizen in, help co-create and write histories and explanations, and make full use of the opportunities that digital technologies open to us, as we have seen here a few examples. Again, when we are talking about storytelling, and it has to be participatory, interactive as much as possible, museums should collaborate much more one with the other. Many archaeological collections are actually dispersed between museums, and people have kind of a wrong idea about what is exhibited if they don't see the entire picture. The digital technologies help us bringing and showing this entire picture. We should also be very careful about inclusiveness aspect, for example, setting up environments for disabled people to enjoy and engage with heritage. And again, here digital technologies can help a lot. And also in terms of reenactment and recontextualization. So I'm done. Thank you very much.
Grazie Sorin, è stato veramente molto interessante. Abbiamo, sto leggendo adesso un messaggio che ci è arrivato. Ci chiedono se ci sia la possibilità di capire se, relativamente ecco, all'ultimo caso che ci hai mandato sulla pittura e quindi sui lavori che si possono fare in... per quanto riguarda... Stanno mandando i messaggi in diretta, quindi mi devi dare un attimo perché li devo leggere. Ok, no, per quanto riguarda una xilografia, chiedono se ci sia la possibilità di capire se la matrice è stata intagliata successivamente, per esempio sia il legno che gli acidi nelle indirette, e se si capisce quando si fanno modifiche analizzando la matrice o se la tecnologia agisce solo nei colori, e quindi è difficile questo discorso. È una domanda veramente molto complessa. Appunto, la xilografia, che è un'opera che si fa prima con un intaglio, quindi in negativo, di solito su un supporto ligneo, e poi si inchiostra e si riporta l'inchiostro, quindi la parte positiva, poi su un foglio. Quindi, se non ho capito male, si chiede se c'è la possibilità, attraverso l'analisi però del foglio, penso di aver capito bene, se c'è la possibilità di capire anche che tipo di matrice sia stata utilizzata e in che modo. No, lo studio della matrice. Quindi fare uno studio sulla matrice, che informazioni può dare? Ecco, mettiamola così, forse è più semplice.
Okay, so it depends on the scene itself. But having an accurate documentation of the shape can help us compare with other matrices, if this is the case. I'm not sure, but actually having an accurate documentation can help compare the geometry of the matrix, apart from the chemical composition of the ink, for example, if there was some ink used there. Then there are analyses of if it's wood you can do dendrochronology and understand immediately the period of the wood itself, if it was applied on a wood. If it was applied on paper, looking at a microscope, you can see the type of the paper itself, and then compare it and see the origin of the paper also. So I hope I answered.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood actually well this answer, this question. So I think your answer replied to my question. So I think it's okay enough. Ok, speriamo di aver capito sia la domanda e quindi poi di aver dato una risposta corretta. Poi chiaramente ci sono ogni tipologia di oggetto che si va ad analizzare attraverso una tecnologia differente, chiaramente può dare dei risultati diversi. Io credo che, penso che Sorin lo abbia spiegato molto bene, la prima cosa è capire qual è l'obiettivo della ricerca. In base a quello poi analizzare quelle che possono essere le migliori, gli step da seguire e quindi poi la migliore tecnologia o più strumenti da utilizzare per poi raggiungere quell'obiettivo. Spesso si fa il contrario, perché ci piace tanto, come stavamo dicendo prima, i droni sono molto affascinanti, il 3D modeling, ho visto tantissimi musei che si sono dotati ad esempio di laser scanner, così come si sono dotati sia per oggetti sia per infrastrutture, quindi per esempio anche architetture, quindi quelli da campo, e poi però non hanno le capacità di utilizzarli a pieno, oppure non sanno bene quale obiettivo raggiungere, nel senso, perché cosa ti serve quel modello 3D? Perché in base al risultato che tu devi ottenere creerai un modello differente. Quindi credo che questa sia la cosa più importante delle nuove tecnologie. È un po' come comprarsi il telefono all'ultimo grido e poi utilizzarlo solo per chiamare. Ecco, sostanzialmente questo penso che sia un po' passatemi scusate il confronto, però credo che sia abbastanza calzante, insomma abbastanza facile e immediato.
Sì, anche, sì, anche non bisogna mai fidarsi di una tecnologia, bisogna fare sempre confronti e corroborazione con altre tecnologie, perché e poi non bisogna mai pensare che una tecnologia basta per dare risposta a tutto. Questo è particolarmente importante quando si parla di digitalizzazione. Cosa vuol dire esattamente? Soltanto la geometria? Oppure anche l'analisi della materia? L'analisi della composizione, di come è stato fatto l'oggetto? Oppure quando si fa per esempio una digitalizzazione di una pergamena? Ora si può fare anche analisi delle ADN, del DNA della pergamena. Quindi
certo.
dove finisce questa documentazione? Quando non ci avevo fatto una documentazione completa. Questo non esiste, è falso. Quindi bisogna sempre pensare agli obiettivi. Quando si sceglie una tecnologia, per quanto è possibile non scegliere mai soltanto una, ma provare a più possibile integrare varie tecnologie.
Certo, e stessa cosa chiaramente anche gli strumenti, anche gli esempi che poi ci hai portato tu oggi, bellissimi, tra l'altro complimenti, hanno dimostrato che l'uso di più tecnologie e di più strumentazione chiaramente dà una resa molto maggiore e ti aiuta a eliminare quei difetti e i limiti che una tecnologia ha e che invece possono essere superati da un'altra. Quindi credo che questo sia ovviamente molto importante da capire, soprattutto quando si parla di fruizione anche museale, e questo credo che sia più che rilevante, quindi grazie. Ho visto che nel frattempo è apparso il co-curatore Valerio De Ida, sicuramente è apparso perché ha visto la parte artistica. Volevi aggiungere qualcosa al riguardo?
Sì, volevo giusto sulla domanda che è stata fatta, che probabilmente era in merito ad un'indagine da fare relativamente alle matrici per capire se è possibile scovare eventuali pentimenti fatti in fase di realizzazione della matrice, cioè se ci sono degli strumenti, in questo caso col microscopio, immagino, ma anche con laser scanner, di capire se l'incisore può o meno aver agito successivamente alla realizzazione della matrice con qualche intaglio successivo. La domanda era relativamente a questo, ecco, che è un po' quello che viene fatto in modo più semplice nell'analisi poi delle pitture su tavola che ci hai mostrato prima o su tela, insomma.
Sì, allora, forse allora l'esempio del cipro minoico è rilevante.
Sì. Sì,
quindi
sì, sì.
Cioè esce fuori abbastanza bene con uno scanner fatto ad alta risoluzione e questi dettagli geometrici escono fuori molto bene. Poi quando si fa il confronto proprio della geometria, se c'è una regolarità o irregolarità, spunta fuori subito.
Certo, perché la prima indagine viene fatta chiaramente sulla stampa e quindi lo storico dell'arte nella fattispecie cosa fa? Va ad analizzare la stampa, nota che c'è qualcosa di strano e allora a quel punto, se si ha a disposizione la matrice, si potrebbe intervenire in questo senso.
Esatto.
Quindi,
se fa una sovrapposizione si rivelano le anomalie.
Perfetto, grazie.
Tendenzialmente tutto quello che è stato soprattutto nelle matrici, nel momento in cui è scolpito non si può più tornare indietro, chiaramente, e quindi tutto ciò che c'è, che non è stato cancellato ma è stato modificato, quella modifica può essere letta e diciamo scovata da strumenti che sono molto precisi, l'avete visto anche voi, e molto puntuali, come può essere un laser scanner per oggetti. Penso anche con la fotogrammetria si possa arrivare a un dettaglio abbastanza puntuale. Chiaramente lì dipende dal tipo di strumentazione anche che le persone hanno a disposizione. Però è veramente affascinante il livello che si può raggiungere di dettaglio e quindi anche di conoscenza di ogni singola opera, parliamo proprio di beni culturali in generale, con appunto le nuove tecnologie. E sarebbe interessante andare a ristudiare tutta una serie di reperti, oggetti, opere d'arte che sono stati studiati, diciamo, anticamente, nel senso che sono stati studiati in un periodo in cui queste tecnologie non erano a disposizione e che adesso in realtà con questi nuovi strumenti ci darebbero delle nuove informazioni, quindi questo potrebbe essere veramente molto interessante e speriamo che poi succeda, ecco. È il caso, ad esempio, ne abbiamo parlato, mi sta molto a cuore, quindi lo ripeto, del Tempio a Pozzo di Santa Cristina è uno di questi, perché si è avuta la possibilità innanzitutto di creare una ricostruzione virtuale, quindi cercare di capire in che modo fosse originariamente e poi anche eliminare la parte restaurata che è stata restaurata talmente bene che non è possibile vederla, cioè capire la differenza a occhio nudo, soprattutto andando appunto in loco a vederla.
Ma soprattutto quello che penso che è anche spuntato fuori è che attraverso l'applicazione di queste nuove tecnologie ci siamo poste tante domande archeologiche che prima non si poteva mai pensare, che poi anche pensare alla domanda, non avere la risposta. E questo è secondo me il grosso vantaggio, uno dei grossi vantaggi di queste tecnologie. Una volta creato lo spazio, per esempio nel caso di Santa Cristina, una volta creato questo spazio, dice vabbè, c'era la luce, da dove veniva la luce, cosa facevano dentro? Quante persone potevano entrare? Come potevano girare d'intorno? Tutte queste domande proprio non le ponevi anche prima. Cioè, una ricerca, diciamo, tradizionale archeologica era trovato qui questo sito è molto simile all'altro sito dall'altra parte. Basta. Finiva lì.
Sì, verissimo. Infatti è veramente molto, molto affascinante ed è un mondo in continua evoluzione, così come lo deve essere la scienza archeologica e la scienza artistica in generale. Ecco, veramente molto interessante. Allora, credo che non ci siano altre domande difficili per te oggi. Le abbiamo concluse. Questa della matrice abbiamo sudato freddo. Giusto, Valerio? Chiedo conferma a te.
No, siamo a posto.
Perfetto. Allora, Sorin, ti ringrazio veramente di cuore per aver accettato questo invito. Per noi è stato veramente importante, ci hai aiutato a migliorare e in qualche modo anche a dare un nuovo messaggio e delle nuove informazioni anche al nostro, insomma, al nostro pubblico. Quindi per questo ti ringraziamo moltissimo e ringraziamo chiaramente il Cryprus Institute. Oltre a questo volevo ricordarvi i prossimi appuntamenti con i talks, dialoghi di archeologia, arte e architettura. Il prossimo sarà il 4 febbraio con Marco Peri. Parleremo dell'esperienza in museo, il senso dell'educazione estetica con l'arte. E poi invece il 12 febbraio, questo ci tengo a dirlo, avremo come ospite la professoressa Anna De Palmas, che in parte si ricollega anche con appunto il professor Sorin Hermon, perché insieme abbiamo lavorato appunto al progetto di Santa Cristina di Paoli Latino, che ci parlerà dalla Sardegna e il Mediterraneo, portandoci anche a Cipro e in generale quindi nel mar Egeo. E quindi questo è veramente molto, molto bello e in qualche modo appunto ci ricollega al talk di oggi. Allora, grazie davvero ancora a Sorin e grazie a tutti per averci seguito. Vi ricordiamo che avete la possibilità di rivedere questa diretta nel nostro canale YouTube. Niente, ci vediamo al prossimo appuntamento. Grazie ancora a tutti e grazie Sorin.
Grazie Isabella, grazie Valerio e ci vediamo presto, spero. È stato un piacere vedervi.
A presto.